They said I was dead. My own son, the boy I carried, fed, and raised through blood and sacrifice, buried me in lies so he could stand at the altar of wealth. But the day he thought I was gone forever, I came back, alive, unbroken, and armed with the truth. That wedding became his funeral, not of life, but of reputation. Daniel Rivera was never the type to wear one face. He wore many. To his professors at school, he was a diligent student, always answering questions with a hint of charm. To friends, he was the guy who seemed to have it all together, clean-cut, sharp dresser, and always 2 steps ahead in conversation. But beneath the surface was something no one ever really touched: Daniel's disdain for where he came from. He grew up in Queens, New York, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and the sound of sirens as their nightly lullaby. His father had died when he was young, leaving his mother, Elena Rivera, to raise him alone. Elena was a nurse's aide at a senior home. She walked miles to save bus fare, came home with sore feet, yet never let her son go hungry. She worked shifts through Christmas, through Thanksgiving, all so Daniel could have books, shoes, and tuition. But instead of gratitude, Daniel felt resentment. He hated the smell of disinfectant that clung to his mother's uniform. He hated the stories of her patients. He hated poverty, not for the struggle it demanded, but for the embarrassment it carved into his pride. In high school, Daniel learned something about himself. He could bend the truth, and people believed him. At first, it was harmless. A story about a weekend trip he never took, a claim that his mother had investments. But when he met Demima Scott, his lies became tools, sharpened and purposeful. Demima was different. She came from wealth, not the flashy kind, but the quiet, established kind. Her family owned real estate across Manhattan and Connecticut. Their brownstone dinners included talk of investments, international travel, and family connections that reached into politics. To Daniel, she was not just a girl. She was a lifeline out of everything he hated about himself. Yet there was a problem: his mother. Elena Rivera would never pass as the image Daniel had painted for himself. She was too raw, too honest, too poor. Her voice would slice through the illusion he had crafted for the Scotts. And so, Daniel began to weave a different story. At first, he told Demima his mother was unwell, struggling with heart problems. Then, he said she was in the hospital, too weak to be seen. By college, the story escalated. Elena had passed away. His mother, alive and working double shifts, had no idea her son had killed her off in words. It was deception perfected, and it worked. Demima's parents embraced him, seeing a strong young man who had survived tragedy. Sympathy became his crown, pity his inheritance. But what Daniel didn't know was that lies never stay buried forever. Because when a mother is erased, she comes back not quietly, but like a storm. If you're hooked already, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The truth is just beginning to unravel. Elena Rivera was the kind of woman people overlooked, yet she was the backbone of her world. Widowed young, she had no choice but to work 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep her son clothed and fed. She worked at a nursing home in Queens, scrubbing floors, lifting frail patients, and tending to those who had no one else. To her co-workers, she was Elena, the dependable one, always covering shifts when others fell short. To Daniel, she was simply Mom, though the warmth of that word faded as he grew older and more ashamed of her. Elena lived by values that hardship had carved into her: honesty, resilience, and dignity. She believed in earning what you had, in never stealing shortcuts through life. These values she poured into Daniel like water into dry soil. But soil doesn't always grow what you intend. Daniel hated the sacrifices his mother made. Instead of admiration, he felt humiliation. While other kids had iPhones, he had second-hand clothes. While others vacationed, he stayed home. Elena thought her son was quiet because of grief for his father. She never realized it was resentment, boiling silently, waiting to explode. Still, Elena believed she was preparing Daniel for a better future. She clipped coupons to buy him books, worked holidays to buy him sneakers, and even sold her wedding ring to help cover his college tuition. Every bead of sweat was a love letter written in sacrifice. Daniel never thanked her. He learned to hide his background, to polish his words, to blend in with students wealthier than he could imagine. Elena still believed he carried her values, unaware that each sacrifice only fueled his desire to escape her shadow. And so, while Elena worked nights thinking her son was building a future she could be proud of, Daniel was rewriting his story, one where his mother didn't exist at all. Daniel's ability to manipulate began in high school. To his teachers, he was the golden student. To his peers, he was the storyteller. He knew how to adjust his image depending on the audience. When he met Demima Scott, his world shifted. She wasn't like the girls he'd grown up with. She carried herself with quiet grace, her wardrobe subtle but expensive, her family name whispered with respect. Daniel wanted her, but more than that, he wanted what she represented, freedom from the chains of poverty. At first, Demima was hesitant. She had heard her mother's warnings: marriages fail because of in-laws. Be careful of who your husband's family is. Demima repeated this to Daniel in passing, not realizing she was handing him the very weapon he needed. Daniel knew immediately, his mother, Elena, would be a liability. A poor, overworked immigrant woman would never pass the scrutiny of the Scotts. So he began shaping a story. My mom's been sick, he told Demima one evening. Heart problems. She doesn't want anyone to see her this way. The seed was planted. Over time, the story deepened. Missed family dinners were explained by hospital visits. Excuses piled up until absence itself became proof. Demima never questioned it. Her sympathy grew, and so did her trust. Daniel's secret was no longer just a lie. It was a foundation. A foundation that would eventually require his mother's death. Demima's family was protective. Her mother, elegant and perceptive, had lived long enough to know that wealth attracted pretenders. She often reminded her daughter, watch the family, not just the man. His family tells you who he is. Daniel listened carefully whenever Demima shared these warnings. He knew if the Scotts met Elena, the charade would crumble. His mother's honesty would cut through his lies like glass. So, Daniel decided to bury her deeper. He played the part of the grieving son even before the supposed loss. He painted images of a mother wasting away, too weak to even lift a spoon. He described hospital bills that drained him emotionally. Friends pitied him. Professors extended deadlines. Even the Scotts admired his resilience. Every lie added another stone to Elena's invisible coffin. Meanwhile, Elena worked night shifts, unaware she was becoming a ghost in her own son's world. She still sent him texts: "Are you eating? Do you need money?" But his replies grew shorter, colder. She thought it was just distance. She had no idea she was being written out of his life entirely. The shadow is growing darker. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. You won't believe what comes next. The day Daniel killed his mother wasn't marked by blood, but by ink. It began with whispers, his classmates telling each other Elena had passed. Professors excusing his absence, offering sympathy. Demima crying in his arms, holding him tighter than ever. But whispers weren't enough. Daniel wanted permanence. He contacted shady connections and managed to secure forged documents, a death certificate declaring Elena Rivera deceased. With a single piece of paper, he erased her existence. The Scotts rallied around him. To them, Daniel was now family. His lack of relatives made him seem even more precious. A man who had lost everything, but gained their daughter. Meanwhile, Elena lived her life in Queens, exhausted but alive. She had no idea her name had been buried, that her son had closed the book on her existence. It was deception perfected. And it would all come crashing down on the day Daniel least expected. A funeral without a body. A mother erased by her own child. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The truth is about to strike back. The day Daniel decided to stage his mother's death, he crossed a line he could never return from. Up until then, his lies had been heavy but manageable. Stories told in passing, excuses crafted in the moment. But once he decided Elena Rivera was officially dead, it became more than deception. It became erasure. Daniel didn't weep for real, but he practiced the look of grief in the mirror. Shoulders bent, voice lowered, eyes distant. He knew how to summon pity, and pity was the currency that bought him entrance into the Scott family's heart. The story he told was simple. Elena had passed quietly after years of struggling with a chronic heart condition. He didn't stage a funeral, didn't invite anyone to mourn with him. He claimed his mother's dying wish was to keep things private. No ceremonies, no viewings, just a quiet burial. At first, Demima accepted this with sorrow. She thought it reflected Elena's humility, a final act of selflessness to avoid burdening her son. The Scotts admired Daniel even more. Such a strong young man, Mrs. Scott told friends at a charity gala. Losing his mother and yet still standing so gracefully. But Daniel knew words alone wouldn't hold up forever. Whispers spread too quickly, and questions had a way of creeping into conversations. Why had no one attended a funeral? Why were there no obituaries? So Daniel did what he had always done, he forged reality. Through an acquaintance, he secured falsified hospital papers and even a death certificate. The document, stamped and sealed, declared Elena Rivera deceased. He kept it folded neatly in his wallet, ready for anyone who might ask. From that moment, his mother wasn't just absent, she was officially gone. The Scotts rallied around him. They welcomed him into their world of penthouse dinners and quiet wealth. To them, Daniel's lack of immediate family made him seem even more precious, a man who had endured tragedy yet remained resilient. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt untouchable. Meanwhile, Elena was alive in Queens, working another night shift, wiping down wheelchairs and tending to the elderly. She had no idea her son had staged her burial. She sent him texts that went unanswered, called his number only to reach voicemail. She assumed he was busy, moving forward in life. She never imagined he was moving forward by killing her existence on paper. Months passed, and the lie hardened into fact. People no longer asked questions. Daniel's story was airtight. In the Scott family's world, Elena Rivera was nothing more than a memory. What Daniel didn't realize, however, was that lies always leave shadows. One evening, at a networking event, a distant acquaintance mentioned Elena. "I thought I saw your mother at the grocery store in Queens," she said casually. Daniel laughed it off. "You must be mistaken. My mom passed last year." The woman blinked, unsure, but let it go. For now. That slip should have warned him. But Daniel had grown too confident, too sure of his performance. He was so focused on the life he was building with Demima and her family that he forgot one crucial truth: ghosts don't stay buried forever. For Elena, her son's lies were about to surface in the cruelest way possible. The world thought she was dead, and she was about to discover it herself, face to face, in the most unexpected encounter. Because funerals leave flowers, obituaries, and memories. But in Daniel's story, there was no grave, no ceremony, no closure. Just silence. And silence never lasts. A funeral without a body. A lie buried too deep. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The truth is about to claw its way out of the grave. The first time Elena realized something was terribly wrong, it happened in the most ordinary place, her neighborhood grocery store. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Elena had just finished a grueling double shift at the nursing home. Her feet ached inside her worn sneakers, and her back throbbed from lifting patients. She stopped by the store to pick up milk and bread, her mind too tired to think about much else. She turned down the produce aisle, and that's when she saw her son's former classmate, Marissa Alvarez. Marissa's eyes widened, her face draining of color. She froze, clutching a basket of apples as if she'd seen an apparition. "Elena," she whispered. Her voice trembled, unsure, almost afraid. Elena smiled wearily, though confused. "Marissa, hi. How are you?" But Marissa didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around, as though checking if anyone else could see what she was seeing. Finally, she stammered, "You're alive." Elena frowned. "Alive? What kind of question is that?" Marissa's lips parted, but she didn't finish. Her hands shook as she shoved the apples back into their bin. I have to go," she muttered, hurrying away without explanation. Elena stood in stunned silence, clutching her milk. A strange chill ran down her spine. Alive? Why would anyone ask her that? That evening, she sat on her small couch, replaying the encounter in her mind. She texted Daniel, "Saw Marissa at the store today. She acted so strange. Do you know if something's wrong?" Hours passed. No reply. The following week, the strangeness continued. At church, an old neighbor gasped when Elena walked in, murmuring a shaky prayer as if she had indeed seen a ghost. At the laundromat, two women whispered furiously when Elena walked by. Finally, Elena confronted one of them directly. "What is it? Why are people staring at me?" The woman hesitated, then blurted out, "They said, you died." Elena's blood ran cold. She pressed for details, but all the woman could offer were fragments, something about Daniel, something about illness, and a quiet funeral no one attended. At first, Elena laughed in disbelief. Dead. How could anyone believe that? But as the whispers grew, as reactions piled up, a sickening truth began to take shape. Her son. Daniel. She knew instantly it had to be him. Only he could spread such a lie wide enough to reach friends, neighbors, even strangers. But why? Why would her only child erase her? Elena spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed her years of sacrifice, long hours at the nursing home, selling her wedding ring to pay his tuition, working Christmas shifts so he wouldn't go without. And this was the thanks she got. Her existence erased with a story. The breaking point came when she went to the DMV to renew her license. The clerk looked at her screen, then back at Elena with confusion. "There's a problem with your file," she said. "According to our records, you're deceased." Elena's knees buckled. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "Excuse me. I don't know how this happened," the clerk muttered, clicking through the system. "But your social security record shows a death notice filed last year." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Death notice. Filed. Official. Her son hadn't just whispered lies. He had buried her on paper. Elena staggered out of the DMV in a daze. On the subway ride home, tears blurred her vision. People glanced at her, but no one asked if she was okay. She sat with her grief, her fists clenched tight in her lap. By the time she reached her apartment, grief had turned to fury. She stood in her dimly lit kitchen, staring at the peeling linoleum floor, and whispered to herself, "Why, Daniel? Why would you do this to me?" She began digging. She called old contacts, asked quiet questions, pieced together scraps of gossip. Each fragment led her closer to the full picture. Daniel had told Demima, his girlfriend, that his mother had died. He had told her family the same. And now, Elena realized, it wasn't just about shame or embarrassment. It was about elevation. Her son had erased her to climb higher. Elena pressed her palm to the table, her breath coming hard. "If he could kill me in words," she thought bitterly, "then he will see me rise in flesh." For the first time in her life, Elena wasn't just surviving. She was preparing. She would not confront him in private. She would not plead for explanations. No, her son wanted her dead, and so she would return to him like a ghost, at the very moment he thought he had one. Daniel had forgotten the oldest truth. Ghosts always return to haunt the living. A ghost in her own city, a mother erased by her child. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The haunting has only just begun. Elena had always believed betrayal was something that happened between lovers, or maybe business partners, not between a mother and her only son. But the more she dug, the more undeniable it became. Daniel had killed her existence, not with a weapon, but with paperwork, whispers, and a story convincing enough to erase her from the world. One sleepless night, Elena sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop open, the glow of the screen cutting across the darkened room. She had searched government databases, filed inquiries, and even paid a private investigator from her dwindling savings. Each answer came back the same: her social security number marked deceased. Her credit frozen. Her medical records closed. She wasn't just erased socially, she had been erased legally. The investigator had given her more. "It wasn't a random clerical error," he explained over the phone. "Someone filed for your death certificate. With forged signatures, medical reports, everything. It's thorough." Elena's throat tightened. And who would have access to that kind of information? There was a pause before the investigator sighed. Only a family member. She hung up, trembling. Her son had gone to lengths that were unimaginable. Forged death certificates, hired people to play the role of grieving relatives, and constructed a believable story of her passing. But why? The answer came through a conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear. Elena had gone back to her old neighborhood in Queens, desperate to blend in and find traces of Daniel's life. She walked past a cafe she used to take him to when he was a boy. That's when she spotted two women she recognized from the past, old neighbors, gossiping as they always had. She slowed her steps, pretending to scroll on her phone. "You know Daniel's marrying into money, right?" one of them whispered. The other gasped. "Demema's family?" "Yes. The father owns half the real estate in Brooklyn. The wedding's going to be huge." Elena froze, her breath catching. "But I still can't get over it," the first woman continued. "Telling that poor girl his mother was dead. What kind of man does that? He said it made him look more independent. That she'd never accept him if she thought he had baggage." The words slammed into Elena like a fist. Baggage. That's what he called me. Suddenly it all made sense, the lies, the forged death certificate, the whispers. Daniel had buried her so that he could rise without the shadow of his working-class mother. In his eyes, she wasn't a mother. She was weight, an anchor, something to be cut loose so he could float toward wealth. Elena's eyes blurred with tears. She stumbled into the alley behind the cafe, her back against the cold brick wall, and cried quietly so no one would hear. But grief soon gave way to anger. For years, she had believed in her son, defended him when others called him arrogant or secretive. She had worked overtime shifts so he could have brand-name sneakers, laptops, and college tuition. She had starved her own dreams so his could thrive. And this was his repayment. To erase her as though she were a stain. Elena pressed her fists against her knees, trembling with rage. "No, Daniel," she whispered to herself. "You don't get to bury me and walk away." She decided then that revenge would not be loud or reckless. It would be precise. If Daniel wanted her dead, then she would return, not as his struggling mother, but as something far more terrifying. She would be the ghost at his banquet, the shadow at his wedding, the living truth he couldn't escape. Her first step was practical. She found a lawyer, a sharp, fast-talking woman named Ava Rosen, recommended by the investigator. Ava had handled identity fraud cases before, but when Elena told her the full story, even Ava leaned back in disbelief. "Your own son," she said softly. "Yes," Elena whispered. Ava shook her head. "Legally, this is massive fraud. He could face charges for falsifying a death certificate, identity theft, financial deception. But the timing, you say he's about to marry." "Yes." Ava's lips curled into something between a smirk and a grin. "Then I suggest we let him walk right into it. The bigger the stage, the louder the fall." Elena's pulse quickened. She could already see it, the grand wedding, Daniel at the altar, basking in wealth and lies. And then her, stepping into the light, alive, undeniable, unstoppable. But Ava had one condition: if we're doing this, you have to be ready. Emotionally, physically, everything. Revenge isn't just about anger. It's about power. For the first time in years, Elena felt power stirring inside her. She nodded. "I'm ready." Together, they began preparing. Ava gathered documents, lined up witnesses who had seen Elena alive, and pulled the legal threads that would unravel Daniel's tapestry of lies. Elena, meanwhile, began to reclaim herself, renewing what she could, taking photographs as proof of life, even recording a sworn video statement that she was not deceased. Every step made her stronger. Every move made her more certain. Daniel thought he had silenced her forever. But Elena was building a voice so loud, so undeniable, that it would echo through his carefully constructed life like a bell tolling at midnight. And when the day came, when the pastor asked the age-old question at the altar, Elena would be there. Not just as a mother, but as the ghost he had created. A mother erased, a son exposed. What happens when the living turn into their own ghost? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The revelations are only getting deeper. The first meeting with Ava Rosen didn't feel like a legal consultation. It felt like war strategy. Elena sat across from her in a sleek Manhattan office, the hum of traffic rising from the street below. The lawyer's desk was cluttered with files, but her sharp eyes cut through everything, focused only on Elena's story. "You're not just suing him," Ava said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "You're exposing him. That's what will give this weight. The truth must be undeniable, and the stage has to be public." Elena shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had never thought of herself as someone who wanted attention. Most of her life had been about staying in the background, working quietly, providing silently, enduring hardships alone. But now, the background had been stolen from her. Her son had buried her in silence. To undo that, she would need to step into the light. "What exactly are my options?" Elena asked softly. Ava leaned back. "Fraud charges, identity theft, falsification of government records. But I'm more interested in leverage. We can build a case so airtight that Daniel won't be able to take a step without tripping over it. The goal isn't just to punish him, it's to make sure he never forgets what he did to you." Those words resonated deeply. Elena didn't just want legal justice. She wanted him to carry the shame, the humiliation, the weight of her presence for the rest of his life. Ava began listing the evidence they needed. 1. Death certificate. They would subpoena the records. Whoever signed and notarized them could expose Daniel's fraud. 2. Hospital records. Daniel had claimed she died of an illness. Elena had been working double shifts at the time, with pay stubs and colleagues to prove it. 3. Witnesses. Friends and neighbors who had seen her alive during the supposed time of death. 4. Financial trails. If Daniel had used her death to close accounts or gain sympathy, there would be paper evidence. Elena scribbled notes, her hand trembling not with fear but with adrenaline. "You're going to need to testify," Ava said. "Not in court yet, but to me, to investigators, maybe eventually on camera. Can you do that?" Elena nodded. "If I can survive being buried alive, I can speak." The lawyer smiled faintly. "Good. Because I also want you to think bigger. You said he's getting married. Imagine if you appeared there, not just in person, but with legal authority in hand. We could serve him right at the altar." Elena's heart pounded at the thought. The image was intoxicating, her son, smug in his lies, holding his wealthy bride's hand, and then her, his supposedly dead mother, walking in with a lawyer by her side. The shock, the disbelief, the ruin. It was almost poetic. Would that be legal? Elena asked carefully. "Absolutely," Ava replied, her grin sharp. "Dramatic. Yes. But legal. You have the right to confront him, and if we time it correctly, we'll already have the papers filed. It will be more than a ghost showing up. It will be a reckoning." Elena left that office with a folder of documents under her arm and something heavier in her chest: resolve. She was no longer simply a mother mourning betrayal. She was a woman preparing for battle. Over the following weeks, preparation became her life. By day, she worked her shifts at the nursing home, quietly stacking away the small paychecks. By night, she sat at her kitchen table, sorting through paperwork, making calls, building her arsenal. One evening, she pulled out an old showbox of photographs. There she was, holding Daniel as a baby, smiling despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Another picture showed him at his high school graduation, her hands clasped proudly. Each photo told a story of sacrifice, love, devotion, and now, betrayal. She taped one picture to her fridge, a daily reminder of why she fought. Daniel at age 7, his arms around her neck, grinning like she was his whole world. Tears pricked her eyes. That little boy was gone. What stood in his place was a man so obsessed with wealth and status that he had murdered her name. But Elena refused to mourn him. Not yet. Not until she finished this. Ava worked with relentless energy. She secured certified copies of the fraudulent death certificate. She tracked down the actors Daniel had paid to play grieving family members. One by one, the lies unraveled, and each thread pulled tighter around Daniel's neck. "You know what I call this?" Ava said one late night on the phone. "I call this poetic justice. He wanted you dead. Then you'll rise from the dead with the law on your side." Elena smiled through her exhaustion. "And with me standing right in front of him." She practiced what she would say at the wedding. Words formed in her mind like fire. If he could bury his own mother alive for money, imagine what else he could do. She would not scream or rage. She would simply stand there, breathing, undeniable proof that she was alive, and that his lies had ended. The thought gave her strength. The wedding day loomed closer. Invitations were circulating in social circles she could never dream of entering. Daniel's name was attached to wealth now, whispered with envy and admiration. But Elena knew the truth. Beneath that glittering facade was rot. And when the day came, she would rip open the facade in front of everyone. The ghost was almost ready. The lawsuit is coming, and so is the ghost. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The revenge is sharpening. Elena never expected to see the wedding invitation with her own eyes. She imagined it would be whispered about in hushed tones, tucked away in the polished hands of the wealthy, mailed to glittering addresses far from her crumbling apartment in Queens. Yet, one Tuesday morning, as she sorted through the stack of bills and junk mail stuffed into her dented mailbox, there it was, an ivory envelope, thick and embossed, her name written in careful calligraphy. Elena Martinez, it read. Her heart thudded as she slid her finger under the seal and pulled the card out. The lettering was gold, the kind that shimmered under the dim light of her hallway. "You are cordially invited to the union of Demima Caldwell and Daniel Martinez." Elena stared at the words, her pulse quickening. Her son hadn't erased her entirely. Not here, at least. He had invited her, perhaps out of obligation, perhaps to flaunt his new world, perhaps confident she was too dead, too erased, to appear. Her lips curled into something between a laugh and a sob. He had written her name as though she were a memory, not a person. A final flourish to his perfect narrative. But Daniel had miscalculated. She wasn't dead. And she would attend. Not as a guest. Not as a mother. But as the ghost he had tried to bury. That night, she placed the invitation on her kitchen table, beside Ava Rosen's ever-growing pile of legal documents. When Ava came by the next day, her sharp eyes immediately caught sight of it. "So," Ava said, picking it up and scanning the golden lettering, "the prodigal son thinks he's invincible." Elena's voice was steady. "He wants me gone, but he still writes my name. I'll give him exactly what he asked for." Ava leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Then this is it. The stage is set." They began to plan with precision. Ava would file the lawsuit strategically to coincide with the wedding date. Witnesses would be ready, documents prepared, and legal representatives on standby. Elena would attend not as a silent mother, but as a plaintiff in a case that would shatter Daniel's carefully constructed lies. Still, Elena couldn't ignore the emotional storm that swirled inside her. For every ounce of rage she felt, there was a pang of grief. She remembered buying Daniel his first suit, his prom corsage, the way he had once whispered, "I'll make you proud, Mom." How had that boy grown into a man who could erase her existence for money? On the night before the wedding, Elena sat at her table with the invitation in her hand. She closed her eyes and pictured the grand hall, the lavish flowers, the wealthy guests sipping champagne. She could almost hear the pastor's voice asking if anyone had cause to object. And she saw herself, standing tall, alive, undeniable. The irony wasn't lost on her. In Daniel's story, she had died long ago. Tomorrow, she would rise again, a living objection. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and cold. Elena dressed carefully, choosing a dark navy suit Ava had helped her pick. It was professional, dignified, not flashy. She pinned her hair neatly and applied just enough makeup to soften her tired features. She wanted to look alive, strong, impossible to dismiss. When she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. Not the overworked nurse. Not the weary mother. Not the ghost Daniel had written into his lies. This was someone new. Someone ready to reclaim her name. Ava arrived in a sleek black car, her briefcase perched beside her. "Ready?" she asked. Elena nodded. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were clear. More than ready. As they drove to the venue, a grand estate in Westchester, Elena's stomach twisted. She pictured Daniel waiting at the altar, his bride glowing beside him, his in-laws proud and unsuspecting. She wondered if Demima's family knew anything at all, or if they too were pawns in his elaborate deception. The closer they got, the stronger Elena's resolve became. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth. If Daniel could erase his own mother, what else was he capable of? The world needed to see him for who he was. The estate loomed ahead, all gleaming stone and manicured gardens. Guests in designer suits and gowns were already filing in, their laughter floating in the air. Elena stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the cobblestone driveway. Heads turned. Some guests frowned, puzzled, as though recognizing her from whispered rumors. "Isn't that?" someone murmured. "But she's supposed to be." Elena kept walking, her chin high. Let them whisper. Let them think her a ghost. That was exactly what she wanted. Inside the hall, the air smelled of roses and money. The decorations were extravagant, chandeliers dripping crystal, a string quartet playing softly. Elena scanned the room, her eyes locking on the altar at the far end. And there he was. Daniel. Her son stood tall in his tailored tuxedo, his arm linked with Demima's. He looked every bit the charming groom, his smile dazzling, his confidence unshakable. Until his gaze fell on her. Elena watched as the color drained from his face, his jaw tightening, his hand slipping slightly from his bride's. For a split second, he looked like the boy she once knew, afraid, guilty, caught. And in that moment, Elena knew, this was the beginning of the end. The pastor's voice rose above the music. "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now." Elena's breath caught. This was it. She stepped forward. The room seemed to freeze the moment Elena took her first step down the aisle. The music faltered, the quartet stumbling over their strings. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The grand chandeliers cast a sharp glow over her figure, every guest turning to look, their whispers swelling into a hum of disbelief. "She's supposed to be dead," someone gasped. "No, that's impossible," another muttered. Elena felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, but her gaze stayed fixed on the altar. On Daniel. Her son's face told the story before he even opened his mouth. His confident smile collapsed into a grimace of horror. He gripped Demima's hand too tightly, his knuckles white. The color drained from his cheeks as though he truly had seen a ghost. Elena's heels clicked steadily against the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat. Each step felt like a reckoning. She wasn't just walking, she was rising from the grave he had dug for her. The pastor faltered. The service." Elena raised her voice, clear and steady. "You asked if anyone had reason to object." "I do." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Demima blinked in confusion, glancing between Daniel and the stranger who had just shattered her wedding. "Daniel, who is this?" Daniel swallowed hard. "It's nothing. Please, let's continue." "Nothing." Elena's voice cut through the air like a blade. She stepped closer to the altar, her eyes burning into him. "Tell her who I am, Daniel. Tell everyone who I am." The guests shifted, uneasy. Demima's father rose from his seat in the front row, his brow furrowed. "Daniel, what is this?" Elena took the final steps forward and stood tall. Her lawyer, Ava Rosen, appeared from the side aisle, a stack of documents in her hand. Together, they looked like judgment itself, one a ghost, the other the law. "I am Elena Martinez," she declared, her voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "Daniel's mother. The woman he told you was dead." The crowd erupted in shock. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Cameras flashed, guests recording on their phones, capturing the scandal in real time. Demima staggered back, her bouquet slipping from her hands. "Dead. He told me you," her voice cracked. She turned to Daniel, betrayal etched across her face. "You said she was gone. You said you buried her last year." Daniel's composure unraveled. "Demima, I can explain." "No," Elena snapped, her voice firm. "You can't explain this. You forged my death. You faked hospital records. You told the world I was gone because you thought I wasn't good enough to stand beside your wealth. You erased me, Daniel. Her words rang through the hall like a bell tolling doom. Guests shifted uncomfortably, the opulence of the room now tainted by the rawness of truth. Demima's father stepped forward, his voice like steel. Is this true? Daniel stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I just wanted a fresh start. She was baggage. The word hung in the air like poison. Baggage. Elena's chest ached, but she didn't falter. Baggage. I am the woman who worked double shifts to put food on your table. Who pawned her wedding ring, so you. The word baggage hung in the air like a curse. Elena's chest tightened, but she stood tall. Her voice didn't shake. Baggage. I am the woman who worked double shifts so you could eat. I am the one who pawned her wedding ring to buy your textbooks. I gave up everything so you could rise, and this is what you call me. Baggage. The crowd murmured louder now, anger building in their whispers. Guests glanced at one another with disgust, the glamour of the day peeling back to reveal the rot beneath. Daniel's hands trembled. Mom, please. Don't you dare call me that, Elena snapped. Her voice cut through the room, sharp as glass. You buried me. You told the world I was dead so you could climb into wealth on the back of lies. If this is how you treat your own mother, then tell me, how will you treat your wife? Demima recoiled as if struck. Her eyes filled with tears as she turned on Daniel. You lied to me. To my family. You told us she died in a hospital. You showed us a certificate. Ava Rosen stepped forward, her heels echoing against the marble. She held up a folder thick with papers. Ladies and gentlemen, what this woman says is true. I represent Elena Martinez in her case against Daniel Martinez for fraud, falsification of documents, and identity theft. Everything you've seen and heard today will be filed in court by morning. Gasps filled the room. Phones were up everywhere now, recording the scandal, broadcasting it to the world. Demima's father, Richard Caldwell, strode to the altar, his face thunderous. Is this true, Daniel? Did you forge documents and lie about your own mother? Daniel's lips moved, but no words came out. Sweat dripped down his temple. He looked small, cornered, stripped of the polished confidence he had worn moments earlier. Answer him. Demima cried. Finally, Daniel blurted out, his voice cracking. I did it for us. To protect us. They would never have accepted me if they knew where I came from, if they knew about her. She's nothing. The room erupted in outrage. Elena's heart ached at the words, but she did not let them crush her. Instead, she raised her chin higher. Nothing. I am standing here, alive, after you tried to erase me. You can call me nothing, but the truth is everything, and today, it has caught up to you. Demima covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She looked at Daniel as if he were a stranger. If you could bury your own mother alive for money, what would you do to me? To my family? I can't, her voice broke. I can't marry you. The bouquet dropped from her hands. The sound of it hitting the marble floor echoed louder than the music ever had. Richard Caldwell turned to the pastor. This wedding is over. The pastor nodded solemnly. So be it. Daniel stumbled forward, reaching for Demima. No, please, wait. You don't understand. But she pulled back, her eyes fierce through her tears. I understand enough. Security guards approached at Richard's command. Daniel's protests grew frantic. You can't do this. I did this for us. For you. But Demima turned her face away. Elena stood still, her lawyer beside her, watching as her son's world unraveled. It wasn't joy she felt. Not exactly. It was something deeper, colder. A justice that had been a long time coming. Daniel's eyes darted toward her one last time. Hatred, fear, desperation, all of it swirled there. You ruined me, he hissed under his breath as the guards escorted him out. Elena didn't flinch. No, Daniel. You ruined yourself. I just refused to stay buried. The guests filed out, murmuring, their glamorous dresses and suits suddenly out of place in the atmosphere of ruin. The chandeliers glittered above, but the room felt darker now, heavy with truth. Ava placed a steady hand on Elena's shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You faced him." Elena's gaze lingered on the doors where her son had been dragged out. Her heart was heavy, but her back remained straight. "This isn't just about him," she said quietly. "It's about me. For once, I stood up. For once, I didn't let someone bury me." For the first time in years, Elena felt alive. Truly alive. As she walked out of the grand hall, the weight of her past seemed to lift, replaced by the knowledge that truth had triumphed, even if the cost was her son. Her revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was simply her presence, the ghost at his altar, the mother he couldn't erase, the truth that destroyed his lies. And she would carry that power with her always. The ghost has spoken, the wedding destroyed, and the truth revealed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The story isn't over, justice is still unfolding. The once grand wedding hall now looked like a battlefield. The flowers remained, the chandeliers sparkled, and the orchestra's instruments still gleamed under the lights, but the people were gone, and with them, the illusion of perfection. Elena stood near the exit, her lawyer Ava still beside her, watching guests scatter into the parking lot. Their murmurs carried into the night like wildfire. She came back from the dead. He lied about his own mother. Did you see her face? Every whisper was another nail in Daniel's coffin, and Elena knew by morning his name would be trending across every platform in America. Outside, camera flashes lit up the night sky. Reporters had already gathered, alerted by whispers on social media. Within minutes of her appearance, clips of Elena standing in her pale grey suit, confronting Daniel at the altar, were flooding TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Headlines blared on screens. The ghost mother at the wedding. Groom's secret exposed by dead parent. Wealthy Caldwell wedding ends in scandal. The world was watching, and Daniel had nowhere to hide. Demima stood near a fountain, her white dress splattered with tears and mascara. She clutched her father's arm, her voice breaking. "How could I not have seen it? How could I have been so blind?" Richard Caldwell's jaw was set like stone. He spoke low, but Elena caught every word. "You saw what he wanted you to see. Men like him, men who claw their way into wealth through deceit, are experts at disguise. Don't blame yourself." Elena's chest tightened at his words. Part of her wanted to reach out to Demima, to comfort the young woman who had been deceived as deeply as she had. But another part whispered, "Let her hurt. Let her see who he really is." Still, she found herself stepping closer. "Demima," Elena said gently. The young woman looked up, her eyes swollen with betrayal. "I know what it feels like to believe in Daniel. I believed in him for 28 years. I gave him everything, and in return, he buried me alive. You are not alone in this pain." Tears spilled anew down Demima's cheeks. She nodded faintly, her lips trembling. For the first time, there was no barrier between them, only the shared wound of Daniel's lies. Meanwhile, security dragged Daniel through the back exit, but the paparazzi were waiting. Cameras flashed as he covered his face with his hands. Shouts cut the air. "Daniel! Did you fake your mother's death for money? Do you have a statement? Are you going to jail?" His designer suit, once a symbol of victory, now hung on him like a costume ripped apart at the seams. He was a fallen prince, exposed before the world. Back inside, Ava tapped Elena's arm. "We should go before this gets uglier. The press will want statements, but you're not ready for that yet. Let me handle them." Elena hesitated, her gaze sweeping the wreckage one last time. The toppled champagne glasses, the abandoned wedding cake, the petals scattered like ashes on the marble floor. This was supposed to be Daniel's triumph. Instead, it was his ruin. And she was the reason. As they walked out, cameras immediately swarmed. Flashes nearly blinded her, voices screamed questions. "Elena, how does it feel to be alive after your son declared you dead? Will you press charges? Do you want revenge?" Elena stopped for a moment, her breath steady. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight for attention. She simply said, loud enough for every microphone, "I came here for the truth. My son lied about me. Tonight, you all saw who he really is. That is all." And with that, she turned and walked to Ava's waiting car. The ride back to her modest apartment was quiet, but Elena's mind buzzed. She replayed every second of the confrontation. The look on Daniel's face when he saw her, the disbelief in Demima's eyes, the collective gasp of the crowd. It was everything she had imagined, and yet it wasn't. Because beneath the satisfaction, there was a raw, aching grief. She had destroyed her son's wedding, but in doing so, she had destroyed the last thread connecting them. Whatever part of him might have once loved her was gone, buried under the weight of shame and rage. "Are you okay?" Ava asked softly. Elena stared out at the city lights. "I don't know. I feel free. But I also feel like I've lost him forever." Ava's eyes softened. He was lost the moment he chose greed over family. Tonight didn't create that truth, it only revealed it. Elena swallowed hard. She knew Ava was right. But knowing it didn't make the wound hurt any less. By morning, the scandal had exploded across the nation. News anchors replayed the footage, commentators debated the ethics, and social media turned the ghost mother at the wedding into a viral sensation. Memes spread like wildfire, some mocking Daniel, others celebrating Elena as a symbol of resilience. Strangers sent messages to her lawyer's office, calling her brave, inspiring, a woman who rose from the ashes to confront betrayal head-on. For the first time in her life, Elena wasn't invisible. But as she sat alone in her apartment that night, staring at the flickering television screen replaying her son's downfall, she wondered if visibility was enough. She had exposed him. She had wrecked his future. But deep down, another question remained, gnawing at her like a wound that wouldn't close. Was this revenge, or justice? Elena leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. The fight was far from over. Court dates loomed, lawyers prepared filings, and Daniel, humiliated but dangerous, would not go down quietly. The confrontation was done. But the war was only beginning. The wedding is over, the scandal has erupted, but the battle for justice is just heating up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. Because the next chapter takes us into the storm Daniel cannot escape. By sunrise, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Elena awoke to the vibration of her phone on the nightstand. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was Ava with more legal documents. But when she finally picked it up, her notifications were endless. Strangers tagging her in videos, journalists emailing her for statements, and clips of last night's confrontation flooding her feed. She hesitated, then tapped one. There she was on screen, standing in the grand hall with her lawyer at her side, her voice clear and unyielding. "Don't you dare call me that. You buried me. You told the world I was dead so you could climb into wealth on the back of lies." The video had over 5 million views. Comments poured in beneath it. This woman is a queen. Absolute icon. Her son is disgusting. Who fakes their mom's death? Protect Elena Martinez at all costs." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had lived most of her life in shadows, unnoticed, surviving paycheck to paycheck. Now, overnight, she was the face of truth and defiance in a world hungry for stories of justice. But fame was a double-edged sword. Outside her apartment, reporters had already gathered, their cameras pointed at her windows. Headlines scrolled across television screens. The ghost mother speaks. Wedding of the year turns into courtroom drama. Daniel Martinez accused of faking his own mother's death. On every channel, commentators dissected the story, some applauding Elena for her courage, others speculating about her motives. Was it revenge? Justice? Or just a broken family feud gone viral? Meanwhile, Daniel was nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled that he had checked into a hotel under an alias, avoiding the paparazzi that hounded him at every turn. His once pristine reputation in the business community was shattered. The Caldwell family had already severed ties, releasing a statement to the press. "We were deceived by Daniel Martinez. We fully support Ms. Elena Martinez in seeking justice, and we are cooperating with authorities in all investigations." It was the final nail in his social coffin. In Ava's office later that day, Elena sat across from her lawyer, papers spread across the desk. Court documents, evidence of forged death certificates, testimonies from actors Daniel had paid to pose as grieving relatives. It was all there, meticulously documented. His defense will try to argue diminished responsibility, Ava explained, adjusting her glasses. They'll say he acted out of desperation, that he wasn't in his right mind. But with the evidence we have, and with the public watching, I don't see him walking away from this unscathed. Elena nodded slowly. I don't want him destroyed for the sake of it. I just want the truth to stand. I want him to face what he did. Ava gave her a look of quiet admiration. That's what makes you different from him. He buried you to rise. You stand in the open, even when it hurts. The trial date was set within a week, expedited by the high-profile nature of the case. The courthouse became a circus. Reporters lined the steps, live streams broadcast every arrival, and supporters held signs outside, "Justice for Elena, and no more lies." Inside, the air was thick with tension. Daniel sat at the defense table, his suit wrinkled, his once confident posture slumped. For the first time, Elena saw fear etched permanently into his features. His eyes flicked toward her, not with love, not even with regret, but with rage. Elena forced herself not to look away. The prosecution presented their case with precision. Falsified documents, witness testimonies, and digital trails leading back to Daniel's bank accounts where he had paid for forged records. Every detail chipped away at his lies, layer by layer. When it was Ava's turn, she rose gracefully, her voice ringing through the courtroom. This is not just about fraud. This is about a man who erased the very person who gave him life, all for the sake of greed. If he can bury his own mother, then what line would he ever draw? Justice is not revenge, it is accountability. And today, we demand accountability. Elena's heart swelled at her lawyer's words. For once, she didn't feel voiceless. Someone was speaking the truth she had carried in silence for too long. But Daniel's defense fought back hard. They painted Elena as manipulative, claiming she had reappeared only to ruin her son's future. They brought up her modest life, her struggles, twisting them into evidence of bitterness and envy. Elena clenched her fists, but Ava whispered, "Stay calm. Let them bury themselves." And they did. Because when the jury saw the forged death certificate side by side with the real one, when they watched the video footage of Daniel calling his mother nothing at the altar, no amount of defense could undo the damage. Outside, the media frenzy only grew. Social platforms turned the trial into daily entertainment, clips spreading like wildfire. Hashtags like #JusticeForElena and #TheGhostAtTheWedding trended worldwide. Yet for Elena, it wasn't about the spectacle. It was about something simpler, something purer, standing in the light after years of being forced into darkness. As court adjourned for the day, Elena stepped outside to face the flashing cameras. She didn't cover her face. She didn't hide. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. I didn't come here for fame. I came here for truth. And truth is the one thing my son could never bury. The crowd erupted in cheers, her words replayed across news outlets within the hour. But as she walked down the courthouse steps, Elena knew this wasn't the end. Trials were unpredictable, Daniel was dangerous, and the closer justice came, the harder he would fight. This was no longer just a family story. It was America's story now. The courtroom battle has begun, the world is watching, and the truth stands trial. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The storm is only just beginning. The courtroom was silent, so silent that Elena could hear her own heartbeat echo in her ears. The jury had been deliberating for hours, the minutes stretching into eternity. Every creak of the old wooden benches, every shuffle of papers from the clerks made her flinch. She sat at the plaintiff's table beside Ava, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the room, Daniel leaned forward, his hair unkempt, dark circles carved under his eyes. For the first time, Elena thought he looked exactly like what he was, a man stripped of illusions, a man waiting for judgment. The bailiff's voice finally broke the silence. All rise. Everyone stood as the jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces unreadable. Elena searched for clues, but their expressions were stone. Her chest tightened. This was it, the moment truth would either be affirmed or dismissed. The judge's voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, an older man with sharp eyes, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Elena's breath caught. She felt Ava's hand gently squeeze her wrist, a silent reminder to stay composed. In the case of Elena Martinez versus Daniel Martinez, on the counts of fraud, falsification of documents, and identity theft, we find the defendant. The pause stretched like a blade hovering in the air. Guilty on all counts. The words thundered through the room. Gasps erupted, followed by a ripple of murmurs. Elena closed her eyes as tears welled, but she did not let them fall. She had promised herself she would meet this moment with strength, not weakness. The judge banged his gavel for order. "Mr. Daniel Martinez, you are hereby convicted of fraud and identity falsification. Sentencing will proceed immediately." Daniel's face drained of color. He stood suddenly, slamming his hands on the table. "This is insane. You don't understand. I did it for love. For survival. She's the one who abandoned me, she." "Silence," the judge barked. "One more outburst and you'll be removed from this courtroom." Daniel's words crumbled into incoherent muttering. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, urging him to sit, but he shook him off violently. His eyes locked on Elena, burning with hatred. "This is your fault," he hissed across the aisle, his voice low but venomous. "You think you've won, but all you've done is destroy me. You'll regret this." Elena held his gaze without flinching. "I already regret giving you life. What I don't regret is standing here, alive, while you face the truth." The judge continued. "Given the severity of the fraud and the deliberate falsification of legal documents, this court sentences Daniel Martinez to 5 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 3. Restitution will also be made to the Caldwell family for damages caused." The gavel struck again. It was over. The courtroom erupted in chaos, reporters rushing out to break the story, onlookers whispering about the sentence, Daniel's lawyer slumping in defeat. Daniel himself was handcuffed by marshals, his wrists bound as though to physically restrain the greed that had driven him. "Mom!" he suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with rage and desperation. "You think you've won? I'll never forgive you. Never." Elena stood, her voice calm, almost cold. "You don't have to forgive me, Daniel. Forgive yourself for burying the only person who ever loved you." The marshals dragged him away, his cries echoing down the hall until they vanished. For the first time in years, Elena felt a weight lift from her chest. Not joy. Not triumph. Something quieter, steadier, closure. Ava leaned close. "You did it. You faced him, and you won." Elena nodded, though her eyes glistened. "Yes. But I didn't win because he lost. I won because I refused to stay buried." As they left the courthouse, the media frenzy was explosive. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Elena walked straight ahead, unflinching. Supporters lined the sidewalks, applauding, holding signs that read, "Truth always wins and justice for Elena." She stopped briefly to speak into a cluster of microphones. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. "My son chose lies, and he paid the price. Let this be a reminder, no one can bury the truth, not even their own mother." Her words were carried live across every network, replayed endlessly online. The nation that once called her invisible now calls her unstoppable. But as she climbed into Ava's car, Elena finally allowed herself a long exhale. Her hands trembled, her chest ached, but her spirit was unbroken. The fight was over. The truth had won. That night, sitting alone in her apartment, she lit a single candle. It wasn't for Daniel, it was for herself. For the years she had lived in shadows, for the silence she had endured, for the dignity she had reclaimed. She whispered softly to the flame, "I am alive, and I will never be erased again." Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of her quiet ritual. But Elena knew her story had already become bigger than her. It was a warning, a testimony, a legacy. Her son was gone, her wounds were deep, but she had risen from the grave he dug for her. And that was enough. The verdict has been delivered, Daniel faces prison, and Elena stands victorious, but at what cost to her heart? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from. The final chapter reveals the true legacy of the ghost at the wedding. The city moved on quickly, as cities always do. By the time Daniel was processed into the prison system, other scandals filled the news cycle. Politicians, celebrities, scandals of greed, each one took its turn in the spotlight. But Elena's story lingered. From forgotten mother to symbol of resilience, Elena Martinez's story. Elena chuckled, shaking her head. I never wanted any of this. I only wanted the truth. And you got it, Ava replied, her tone firm but warm. You didn't just get it for yourself. You gave it to everyone who's ever been betrayed and told their pain didn't matter. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the past months finally easing. Elena found herself laughing, something she hadn't done freely in years. Later that night, alone with her thoughts, she sat by her window. The candle she had lit after the verdict still sat on the sill, melted down to a stub. She thought about Daniel, her son, now sitting in a prison cell. Was there a part of her that still loved him? Of course. A mother's heart doesn't stop beating because her child has gone astray. But love didn't mean blindness. Love didn't mean she had to accept lies. She whispered into the night air, as if he could hear her from behind the bars. I hope prison teaches you what I couldn't. I hope it strips away your greed, your pride, your arrogance. I hope someday you learn that money was never worth a mother's grave. The city lights twinkled in response, silent and indifferent. Weeks passed. The frenzy died down, the paparazzi moved on, and Elena reclaimed her quiet life. But she was not the same woman who once hid in the shadows. She walked taller now. She spoke louder. She no longer apologized for existing. At the grocery store, strangers sometimes stopped her. Aren't you? They would begin. And she would smile gently, nodding, but never letting the moment linger too long. Fame wasn't what she sought. What she carried was something deeper than fame. It was freedom. On the 1-year anniversary of the ruined wedding, Elena returned to the church. It stood empty, the same high ceilings and glittering chandeliers, but stripped of flowers, music, and lies. She walked down the aisle slowly, each step echoing like a memory. At the altar, she paused. She could still hear Daniel's voice, desperate and venomous. She could still feel the eyes of the crowd, the weight of their judgment, the sharp taste of truth as it finally spilled free. But she did not come here for ghosts. She came to close the circle. Elena whispered, I forgive myself for staying silent so long. I forgive myself for loving a son who betrayed me. And I forgive you, Daniel, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your chains any longer. The words lifted something heavy inside her. She left the church lighter than she had entered, her heart no longer bound to the ruins of that day. Outside, the autumn wind swept across her face. For the first time in decades, Elena felt at peace. Her legacy would not be her suffering, nor her son's betrayal. Her legacy was truth, and the courage to rise from the grave of lies. As she walked away, the sunset cast the sky in gold, painting her silhouette like a woman reborn. The world would remember the ghost at the wedding. But Elena, she would simply remember herself as alive. And there it is, the final chapter. Elena's revenge is complete, her truth has triumphed, and her legacy shines brighter than her betrayal. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're streaming from, because stories like this remind us, truth always rises, even from the grave.